The dust from Redstone coated Rosalie's tongue for 3 days. It was a bitter taste, the flavor of betrayal and sulfur. She had left town on the noon stage, her entire life crammed into one carpetbag. The other women at the Red Garter had watched her go from the upstairs windows, their faces pale and curious, but none had waved. Rosalie, known then as the Rose of Redstone, had made a mistake. She had believed a man, Sheriff Mason, with his silver star and his warm hands, had spoken of a small ranch outside of town. He had whispered promises against her skin in the dark, promises that sounded like church bells and white picket fences. Then the banker's daughter, Elora, had come to town, and suddenly Sheriff Mason's promises turned to smoke. The scandal wasn't that he had visited a soiled dove. Half the town council did. The scandal was that Rosalie had confronted him. She had done it on the main street, right in front of the mercantile. She had held up the small, pearl-handled derringer he had given her. "You forgot this, Sheriff," she had said, her voice shaking but clear. The banker's daughter had slapped her. Rosalie, who had survived 3 years in a Kansas City saloon and 2 on the frontier, did not flinch. She simply looked at Mason. His face, the one she had kissed just 2 nights before, was cold. He had grabbed her arm, hard enough to leave bruises. "You're drunk, Rosalie, causing a public disturbance." He called her Rosalie, not Rose. That's how she knew it was over. She was run out of town by sundown, branded a troublemaker and a threat to polite society. Her savings, meant for that new life, were mostly gone. Paid to the stagecoach driver for the long ride into the territory, and the last of it for a seat on a buckboard wagon that rattled her bones up into the high country. The place she was going was barely a town. It was a relay station, a solitary collection of log buildings huddled near the mouth of the Grizzly Pass. The owner, a widow named Mrs. Albright, was as weathered as the wind-blasted pines. She had one eye clouded over with a cataract and a grip like a blacksmith. "I need a cook and a cleaner," Mrs. Albright had said, looking Rosalie up and down. She didn't ask about Redstone. The telegram Rosalie had sent had been vague, mentioning only domestic skills. "This ain't a saloon. This is a waypoint. You'll see men, rough men, but they are just passing through. You serve the food. You clean the rooms. You keep to yourself. You understand me?" "Yes, ma'am," Rosalie said. "The pay is $20 a month, plus board. The board is a cot in the attic above the kitchen. It's cold, but it's private. Take it or leave it." "I'll take it." The station was stark. There was the main house, where Mrs. Albright lived and kept 2 rooms for paying travelers. There was a long, low stable, managed by a quiet man named Henderson. And there was the kitchen house, a separate, sturdy cabin where Rosalie would spend her days, connected to the main house by a covered boardwalk. It was isolated. The nearest neighbor was 15 miles of bad trail away. Rosalie looked at the sharp, snow-dusted peaks of the mountains looming over the pass. It felt like the end of the world. It was exactly what she needed. She worked for 3 weeks. She baked bread. She stewed tough beef. She scrubbed floors until her knuckles were raw. She learned the sound of the wind. It never stopped. It was a constant, high-pitched scream that stripped the warmth from the air and the hope from a person's soul. She spoke little to Henderson, and less to the few trappers and prospectors who passed through. Her past was a locked box. She intended to keep it that way. Then, as the first true snows of the season began to dust the high ground, Eli arrived. He didn't ride a proud stallion. He rode a short, thick-legged mule, a creature built for endurance, not for show. He led the animal into the stable, his gait uneven, favoring his right leg. Henderson met him at the stable door, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the snow. "You're the man from Cheyenne?" Henderson asked. The man just nodded. He wore a heavy buffalo coat that looked like it weighed 50 pounds, the fur matted with ice. "The job's simple," Henderson said, though his tone suggested it was anything but. You're the winter courier. The mail contract needs one run a week through the Grizzly Pass to Miller's Fork, the last man who tried it. His horse fell through a snow cornice. They found him in the spring thaw, 2 miles from the summit. The man looked up at the pass. His face was mostly hidden by a low-brimmed hat and a thick, untrimmed beard. Mrs. Albright is offering $50 coin for each successful round trip. Henderson continued, as if trying to convince himself. It's madness. No one else dares. The army won't even try it. You still want it? The man said nothing. He just tied the mule's rein to a post and began to unbuckle the saddlebags. Henderson grunted. Figured. You couriers are all half mad or running from something. Supper's in the kitchen house. Cook's name is Rosalie. Rosalie was kneading dough for the morning bread. The kitchen was hot, smelling of yeast and wood smoke. The door swung open, and the wind slammed into her, rattling the pans on the wall. He stood in the doorway, a human silhouette against the blinding white snow outside. He was tall, but he held himself with a slight hunch, as if expecting a blow. He took off his hat, slapping the snow from it against his leg. The lamplight fell on his face. Rosalie's hands stopped moving in the dough. She had seen scarred men missing fingers, men with puckered bullet holes, men with knife cuts. This was different. A thick, ropey scar started at his right temple, cut down across the hard plane of his cheek, and vanished into the rough beard below his jaw. It wasn't a clean cut. It was jagged, pulling the corner of his eye into a permanent, mournful slant. He did not look at her. His gaze swept the room, noting the exits, the hearth, the table. His eyes were the color of a frozen lake. Dead. Supper is stew, Rosalie said. Her voice came out lower than she intended. He nodded, just once. He moved to the smallest table, the one in the corner, his back to the wall. He moved with a quietness that was unsettling. He didn't scrape the chair, he just sat. He kept his heavy coat on. She ladled the stew into a tin bowl and put it on the table in front of him. She added a thick slice of the bread she had baked that morning. His hands, when they emerged from his sleeves to grip the spoon, were worse than his face. They were a map of old miseries, rope burns, frostbite scars, the shiny, melted skin of old burns. 2 of his fingernails were gone. The flesh underneath healed into rough nubs. He ate. He didn't seem to taste the food. He just shoveled it in, his eyes fixed on the wooden tabletop. The air in the kitchen was cold, despite the roaring fire. Rosalie felt it settle around her. It was the chill of him. She had spent 5 years reading men, learning their desires, their weaknesses, their rages. This man was a blank page. She sensed a pain so vast and so deep that it had swallowed the man whole. She turned her back on him, returning to her dough, punching it with more force than necessary. She recognized the wall he had built. She had one just like it. His was made of silence and scars. Hers was made of weary beauty and a cold resolve. She would not let him touch hers, and she had no intention of touching his. He finished. The scrape of the spoon on the tin bowl was loud in the silence. He stood, put a single coin on the table for the meal, and walked out. The door shut with a soft, final click. Rosalie let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The next day, the storm came. It had been threatening all morning, the sky a low, bruised purple. Eli had been in the stable, checking his mule's shoes, packing his mail satchels. Rosalie had watched him from the kitchen window. He worked with a grim, mechanical efficiency. Around noon, the wind stopped. The silence was absolute. It was the most terrifying sound Rosalie had ever heard. Then the first flakes began to fall. They were not gentle. They were thick, wet, and fast. Within an hour, the world was gone. The snow didn't fall. It moved horizontally, a solid white wall of ice and wind that erased the stables, the main house, and the mountains. Henderson burst into the kitchen, his face caked in ice, his mustache frozen solid. "That's it!" he shouted over the roar. "The pass is shut! Drifts are already 10 feet deep at the mouth. Nothing's getting in or out of here for days. Maybe a week, maybe more." He looked at Eli, who had come in from the stable and was standing by the door. "You're trapped. Courier. You ain't going nowhere." Eli just stared out the window, his scarred cheek illuminated by the gray light. He seemed to be listening to the storm. "The boardwalk to the main house is already drifting over," Henderson said, anxiety making his voice high. "It's not safe to cross. I've got to get back and bar the shutters. You two, you'll have to make do here. The kitchen's stocked. The wood pile is right outside the door. Just stay put. Don't go out." He looked from Rosalie's pale face to Eli's blank one. "Just stay put." He plunged back into the blizzard. The door slammed shut, and the latch dropped. They were alone. The storm was a screaming animal, clawing at the logs, howling down the chimney. The small cabin felt like the last solid place on earth. The first night was the worst. The tension was a physical thing, thick as the smoke from the hearth. Rosalie kept the fire stoked high. The cabin had one room, dominated by the huge cooking fireplace. Her own small cot was in the far corner. There was a rough-hewn table and 2 chairs. That was all. Eli had not spoken a word. He had brought his saddlebags in from the stable before the storm hit full, and they sat by his feet. For dinner, Rosalie made what she had, oatmeal. She cooked a large pot of it, thin and hot. She ladled it into 2 bowls. She set one on the table. Eli sat, ate it, and pushed the bowl back. She took her own bowl and sat on her cot, as far from him as she could get, near the fire. They sat in silence for hours. The only sounds were the roar of the wind and the crackle of the pitch pine. She watched him. He seemed carved from the wood of the table. He did not fidget. He did not sleep. He just sat, his hands resting on his knees. She looked at him, and he looked at the fire. Once, his gaze lifted and met hers across the small room. His eyes were not hostile. They were not assessing. They were just empty. He held her gaze for a second, then looked away. Rosalie felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. She felt like she was looking at a man who had already died, and his body just hadn't been told yet. The fire was hot, the cabin stuffy. Eli stood up, his movement stiff. He turned his back to her and shrugged out of the heavy buffalo coat. He wore a simple wool shirt underneath, gray and worn thin. As he reached for the water dipper on the shelf, the lamplight caught the back of his neck. Rosalie's breath hitched. Above the collar of the shirt, the skin was a terrible landscape. It was not one scar. It was a dozen, perhaps more. A tangled web of raised white tissue, puckered and deep. It looked like an old burn, or the remnant of a lash. She stared, unable to look away. It was horrific. He must have felt her eyes. He paused, his hand halfway to the dipper. He didn't turn around. Not fully. He just turned his head, looking at her over his shoulder. His eyes met hers. This time his gaze was not empty. It was cold. It was a flat, hard warning. Rosalie flinched and looked down at her hands, her face burning with shame. She had been caught staring at his wounds, a thing no decent person would do. When she dared to look up again, he had turned his back completely. He did not put the coat back on. Darkness fell, but the storm provided no night, just a churning, endless gray. Rosalie knew she had to sleep. She unlaced her boots but kept the rest of her clothes on. She pulled her blankets up to her chin, curling into a tight ball on the cot, facing the hearth. Her back was to him. She felt terribly vulnerable. She did not know this man. He was scarred, silent, and trapped. He was, perhaps, dangerous, but her exhaustion was heavier than her fear. She drifted into a light, uneasy doze. She woke sometime later. The fire had burned down to glowing coals. The room was colder. The wind was still screaming. She opened her eyes. Eli had not moved from the chair. He had not taken the other blanket she had left out. He was sitting upright, awake. He was watching her. His face was in shadow, the scar a dark line. The coals cast a faint, reddish glow. She couldn't read his expression. He was just watching. Rosalie's heart began a slow, heavy drumbeat against her ribs. This was not the predatory gaze of a man in a brothel, calculating her worth. This was something else entirely. It was the look of a sentinel, a guardian. But as she watched him through her lashes, his head tilted. The firelight caught the wetness on his scarred cheek. He wasn't crying. It was a single tear that had escaped, tracing the jagged line of the scar tissue. He was looking at her, at the curve of her hip under the blanket, at the spill of her dark hair on the pillow, and his face was a mask of such profound, agonizing pain, such a deep and forbidden longing, that Rosalie felt her own throat tighten. He wasn't a threat. He was a man in hell. He raised a rough hand, not to wipe the tear, but to touch the scar on his own face, his fingers tracing it as if it were a map. He looked at her, this broken man, and she saw the hunger. It was not for her body. It was for the warmth she represented. It was for a life he clearly believed he could never have. Rosalie squeezed her eyes shut, feigning sleep, her heart aching with a strange, unfamiliar pity. She lay there, rigid, listening to the silence of the man and the violence of the storm. And for the first time since Redstone, she felt a fear that was not for herself, but for the man sitting in the dark, guarding her while he drowned in his own past. The storm did not break. It held the small cabin in a screaming white fist for a second day, and then a third. The world shrank to the four-log walls of the kitchen house. The wind was a physical weight, a constant pressure that frayed the nerves and made the small silences inside unbearable. On the morning of the third day, the routine of survival began to chip away at the coldness between them. The woodpile, stacked just outside the door, was drifted over. Eli took the axe and went out. Rosalie watched him through the single, ice-caked window. He worked with a brutal, rhythmic efficiency. He did not seem to feel the cold. He was a machine built to endure. He split the frozen pine logs one by one, his scarred face impassive, his breath pluming. He worked for 2 hours, never pausing, until a new, man-high stack of wood was piled by the door. Rosalie, in turn, retreated to her own work. She baked. She counted the sacks of flour, the beans, the salt pork. She made coffee, thick and black. The domestic tasks, the ones she had taken on to escape her old life, now felt like an anchor. They were real. The silence between them was no longer the sharp-edged silence of strangers. It was the heavy, shared silence of prisoners. "The wood is split," he said, his voice rough from disuse as he came back inside, shaking snow from his coat. "The coffee is hot," she replied, not looking up from the pot. It was a start. Later that day, she found the draft. It came from the wall near her cot, a thin, icy finger of wind that cut through the chinking. She tried to plug it with a spare rag, but it was too wide. She saw Eli watching her. He got up from the table. He went outside, returning with a bucket of half-frozen mud and a handful of dry straw from the stable. He knelt by the wall, his back to her, and began mixing the daub with his bare, scarred hands. Rosalie hesitated, then tore a piece of her rag and dipped it in the hot water from the kettle. She knelt near him. "Your hands," she said. He didn't look at her. "They're numb." "They won't be for long. Let me—" She took his right hand, the one that had been burned, and wiped the freezing mud from it. He flinched at the touch, a violent, involuntary jerk, but he did not pull his hand away. She cleaned his fingers gently, her touch professional and distant, the way she had once touched 100 men. But this was different. This was not a transaction. This was mending. He took the rag from her. "I can do it." "I'll mix. You pack," she said, her voice firm. They worked for an hour, their hands moving in a shared, simple rhythm. Her, mixing the mud and straw. Him, packing it deep into the cracks of the wall. Their shoulders almost touched. The cold draft ceased. "Thank you," she said, rising and wiping her hands on her apron. "Good morning," he'd said the next day, and the words had hung in the air, heavy with meaning. "Good morning, Eli," she had replied. The thaw had begun, not in the weather, but in the cabin. He was not just a scarred brute. She learned this in small pieces. On the fourth day, she was sweeping the floor near his saddlebags and saw them propped open. Inside, next to a box of cartridges and a whetstone, was a book. It was bound in dark leather, the cover warped and stained by water. The gold lettering was almost gone, but she could read the title, The Count of Monte Cristo. She looked at the book, then at the man sitting at the table, sharpening his skinning knife, a book about a man buried alive, who clawed his way back to the world to find it changed, a book about vengeance. She suddenly understood him a little better. That night, she woke to a sound. The wind had died down to a low moan, and underneath it, another sound filled the cabin. It was music. It was low and heartbreakingly sad. She opened her eyes. Eli was sitting by the banked fire, his back to her. He had a small harmonica in his hands. He was playing, his head bowed. The tune was slow, a dirge. She knew the song. It was Lorena, a song that soldiers from both North and South had sung, a ballad of lost love and a past that could not be reclaimed. He played it all the way through, the last note hanging in the air. "You were a soldier," she said into the darkness. He stiffened. The music stopped. He did not turn. "Yes, ma'am." "For the Confederacy." It wasn't a question. The song was their anthem of loss. "Yes." He said the word as if it were a confession, bracing for the judgment, the anger of a Yankee. Rosalie just pulled the blanket tighter. "It was a terrible war. It made monsters of everyone." He put the harmonica away. He did not play it again. The next day, it was her turn. The storm had broken, but the snow was too deep to move. They were still trapped, waiting for the drifts to settle. The shared work, the music, the book. It had loosened something in her. She was mending one of his shirts. He had few possessions, and all were worn. He was at the table, reading his book, the lamplight falling on his scarred cheek. "He promised me a house," Rosalie said, her voice quiet. Eli did not look up, but his hands stilled on the pages. "A small ranch, west of Redstone. He said he loved me. He said I was different from the other girls." Rosalie's needle paused. "Sheriff Mason, a man with a silver star and a black heart." She told him. She told him about the banker's daughter, the public confrontation, the way he had looked at her as if she were dirt. "He called me a whore and a drunkard," she whispered, her voice hardening. "And he let his new friends, the banker's sons, he let them prove it. They dragged me into the alley behind the feed store to teach me a lesson. They tore my dress. They hit me. They—" She stopped. She could not say the rest. She had never told anyone. "And he stood at the mouth of the alley," she finished, her voice flat and dead. He watched them beat me. When they were done, he spit on the ground and told me to be out of town by morning." She looked at her hands, holding the needle and thread. She had expected to cry, but she was cold. She was back in that alley, the taste of blood and dust in her mouth. Eli said nothing. She looked up. He had closed the book. His scarred hands were clenched into white-knuckled fists on the table. His jaw was tight, the ropey scar pulling his mouth into a grimace. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the wall, at a place far beyond it. He looked like a man who understood, in his bones, what it meant to be held down and brutalized while the world watched. That night, the air was different. They were no longer just two people. They were two wounds, sitting side by side in the dark. They sat by the fire, the lamp burning low between them. The cabin was quiet. "Eli," she said, her voice stronger now. "What happened to you?" He looked at the fire. The silence stretched, and she thought he would not answer. He had shared his music, his book, his past as a soldier. He would not share this. "It doesn't matter," he said, his voice a low rasp. "It matters to me." He shook his head. He seemed to shrink, the wall of silence rebuilding itself. But then he did something that surprised her. He reached for his saddlebag, the one he kept by his feet. He pulled out a small, oilskin-wrapped bundle. He unwrapped it. Inside was a letter. It was old, the paper yellowed and soft as cloth, the folds worn through in places. It had been opened and refolded 100 times. He didn't speak. He just held it out to her. Her hands trembled as she took it. The ink was faded, the handwriting precise. It was addressed to a Miss Sarah Beth Vance, General Delivery, Denver, Colorado Territory. She looked at him, asking permission. He nodded. She read, "My dearest sister, I am alive. I pray to God this letter finds you. I was released from the prison camp at Rock Island. I am heading west. I went back to the farm. There is nothing left. Sarah, the house is gone, burned to the ground. The Abernathys said you left with a church group, heading for the territories. They said you were sick. I will find you. I am coming. Do not give up hope. I will find you. Your brother, Elias." The letter was dated 1866, 3 years ago. It had been re-stamped and forwarded. Laramie, Cheyenne, Salt Lake City. It had been everywhere. An unsent, undeliverable piece of hope. Rosalie folded the letter, her eyes stinging. Did you find her?" Eli stared into the fire. "No. She died of fever in a wagon camp outside Omaha. 2 years before I even got out of that camp. I've been carrying this for 3 years. I don't know who to give it to." Rosalie felt a tear slide down her own cheek. She put the letter on the table. Without thinking, driven by an impulse she could not name, she reached across the small space and covered his scarred, calloused hand with her own. It was like touching hot iron. Eli sucked in a sharp breath. His entire body went rigid. He stared at her hand on his, as if it were a snake. It was a single, fragile second, a moment of shared humanity. Then he ripped his hand away. He stood so fast his chair crashed over onto the floor. He grabbed his coat and plunged out the door, into the cold night air, leaving her alone with the fallen chair and the ghost of his sister. He did not come back for a long time. The next day, the fragile truce was broken. The cabin was cold again. Eli's face was shut, the wall back up, higher and harder than before. He spent the morning in the stable, tending his mule. Rosalie went to the stable to fetch a new bucket of oats. The snow was packed hard. The sky a blinding, brilliant blue. The world was silent. She found him. He was not tending the mule. He was standing in an empty stall, his back to the door, his left sleeve rolled up to the elbow. He was holding a small, sharp piece of rock salt. He had an old wound on his forearm, a puckered, ugly scar from a mini ball. He was grinding the salt into it. He was digging into the old wound, his face a mask of concentration, his arm bleeding sluggishly in the freezing air. He was punishing himself. For the letter, for the touch, for surviving when his sister had not. Rosalie dropped the bucket. The sound echoed in the cold stable. He whirled around, his eyes wide, like a wolf caught in a trap. He hid his arm behind his back. "What are you doing?" she whispered, horrified. "It's nothing," he snarled. "You're hurting yourself. You're making it bleed." She took a step toward him. "Stop it." "It's none of your concern. Woman, get back to the kitchen." The coldness in his voice, the dismissal, snapped something in her. All the fear, the isolation, the pity. It all turned into a white-hot rage. "Stop it!" she screamed, her voice cracking. She lunged forward and slapped the salt rock from his hand. "You fool! You goddamn fool! What do you think that does? You think that brings her back? You think that pays for anything?" He grabbed her wrist, his grip like a steel trap. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know a man trying to kill himself by inches," she cried, struggling against his grip. "You think you're the only one who hurts? You think you're the only one with scars?" He shoved her, hard. She stumbled back against the stall, falling into the dirty straw. "What do you know about pain?" he growled, advancing on her, his face terrible. "You, with your soft hands and your pretty face. You think your little alley beating compares? You were hurt for an hour. I was hurt for 2 years. Every day, every night. They... He couldn't say it. He just shook his head, his whole body trembling with a rage that had no target. Rosalie pushed herself up from the straw, her own anger matching his. "I know pain, you fool," she spat, her voice shaking. "I know being touched when you want to die. I know feeling your soul leave your body just so you can survive the next 5 minutes. I let men, dozens of men, use my body. Men I hated, men who smelled like whiskey and pigs. I let them do whatever they wanted, and I made my face a mask. I made my soul a stone. I never flinched. I felt nothing. It was easy." She took a step toward him, jabbing a finger at his chest. "But you, with your silence and your scars, you scare me. I've never been scared before. But with you, I'm afraid. I'm afraid of what I'm feeling. I'm afraid of myself." They stood inches apart, breathing hard, the vapor of their breath mingling in the frozen air. The stable was silent, save for the soft stamp of the mule. He had broken her open, and she had broken him. That night, the storm was gone, but a new one had taken its place. Inside the cabin, they ate their meal of salt pork and beans in a silence so thick it was suffocating. Rosalie sat on her cot, brushing her hair. She was exhausted. Eli stood up from the table. He did not go to his usual chair. He walked across the small room and stood in front of her. She looked up, her heart hammering. He slowly, agonizingly, knelt in front of her. He looked at her face, his eyes tracing her features as if seeing her for the first time. Then, with a hand that trembled, his scarred, burned hand, he reached up. He laid his palm against her cheek. The touch was rough. The calluses scraped her skin. But it was warmer than the fire. It was the first truly human touch she had felt in years. It was not a touch that wanted to take. It was a touch that wanted to feel. She closed her eyes, a single tear escaping, and leaned into his hand. He let out a shuddering breath. She raised her own hand, her fingers trembling. She touched his face, his rough beard, the hard line of his jaw. She traced the jagged scar on his cheek. He closed his eyes, a look of profound pain and relief passing over his face. Her hand moved. She wanted to comfort him. She slid her hand from his face, over his shoulder, to his back. She wanted to hold him. She felt it, through the thin wool of his shirt. Her fingers stopped. Her breath caught in her throat. She had expected scars. She had seen the ones on his neck, but this was different. This was not the raised ridge of a whip. This was a landscape of pure horror. His back was not smooth skin. It was a mass of deep, concave hollows, separated by thick, ropey ridges of tissue. It felt like he had been half-eaten. The scars were deeply indented, just as she had once read in a medical book, places where the flesh had been torn out and never grown back. Her hand froze. She could not move. It was not disgust. It was a soul-deep shock at the kind of cruelty one man could inflict on another. He felt it. He felt her hand go still. He felt the sudden tension in her fingers. His eyes snapped open. The light in them died. His face, which had been open and vulnerable, slammed shut. The wall was back, made of granite and ice. He pulled his hand from her face as if she had struck him. He stood up, turning his back to her. "Eli," she whispered, her voice breaking. She saw his shoulders hunch. She was crying. tears of pity, of shock, of her own failure. "Eli, I didn't mean—" He spoke, his voice dead, scraping the words from the bottom of his soul. He did not turn. "I am not a man anymore." He walked to the table, sat in his chair facing the dark, frozen window, and did not move again until morning. The week that followed was a quiet hell. His words, "I am not a man anymore," had fallen into the air of the cabin and frozen there. They hung between them, more solid and colder than the ice on the window pane. They avoided each other. In a one-room cabin. This took effort. It was a miserable choreography of polite avoidance. He spent most of his days in the stable. Rosalie would see him through the window, currying the mule until its coat shone, or methodically checking the stitching on the mail satchels, or just sitting on a hay bale, staring at the snow-choked mouth of the pass. He was waiting. He was a creature coiled, waiting for the world to let him leave. She stayed in the kitchen. She scrubbed the floor until the wood was pale. She baked bread they did not eat. She organized the tins of beans and flour, lining them up in perfect, severe rows. They were two people trapped in a box, each carving out a tiny, desperate territory. The snow deepened. The storm had passed, but the cold remained. A deep, penetrating cold that settled into the logs and the bones. The wind returned, not as a raging blizzard, but as a constant, high-pitched scream. It clawed at the roof shingles, day and night. The silence inside was worse. It was heavy, suffocating. They ate their meals separately. She would leave a plate of stew on the hearth. Hours later, he would come in, his boots stamping the snow from them, his face hidden by the cold. He would take the plate to the table, his back to her, eat quickly, and leave. He never sat by the fire. He never took the chair near her cot. He had retreated completely into the version of himself that was scarred and silent. He was the courier, the half-mad man Henderson had spoken of, and she was just the cook. The intimacy they had shared, the brief, painful confession, had been erased, or rather, it had been buried, like a body in a snowdrift. Rosalie felt the rejection as a dull ache. She was used to men. She knew their rages, their clumsy desires, their weaknesses. She had never known this. She had never known a man who was not angry, but broken. He had not pushed her away in anger. He had pushed her away in shame. On the 8th day, she could not bear the silence any longer. He had gone to the stable at dawn. The cabin felt empty, but his presence lingered. His saddlebags were in the corner where he slept, on the floor, using them as a pillow. She was sweeping. It was her armor, the mindless work. She swept around the bags, nudging them with the broom. The leather flap fell open. She saw the book, The Count of Monte Cristo, and next to it, another, thinner volume. It was a simple ledger book, the kind a storekeeper might use, bound in plain black cardboard. She did not mean to look. She told herself she was just cleaning, but her hand moved. She knelt, her heart pounding a dull, heavy beat. She pulled the ledger out. It was his journal. His handwriting was not the neat, practiced script of the letter to his sister. This was rough, slashed into the paper, as if the words themselves were a fight. It was a log of his life, but only the parts that mattered to him. It was a record of roads. She read entries. Cheyenne to Laramie. 3 days. Blizzard. Paid $10. Ogallala. Lost a horse. Shot it. South Platte. River high. Swam it. They were the notes of a man who measured his life in miles and hardships. She turned the page. And she found it. The entries changed. The dates were older. From 1864. Rock Island. November 10th. They took our blankets. November 20th. First snow. Jenkins froze to death in the night. We drew lots for his boots. December 3rd. Dysentery. Watch 10 men die. They cannot bury them. The ground is iron. Rosalie's hand flew to her mouth. She read on, her eyes scanning the terrible. Spare words. December 18th. Caught stealing a potato. 10 lashes. The salt. He had not finished the sentence. January 5th. Pox. The pox wagon comes. They say it is a blessing. It is quick. I did not get it. January 19th. Day 42. No food for 3 days. Ate bark. Cooked a rat. Thank God for it. February 2nd. The riot. The guards fired into the barracks. Silas was shot. He bled for a day. He kept calling for his mother. February 10th. The branding. For looking at a guard? They said it was insolence. They held me down in the snow. Rosalie slammed the book shut. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely hold it. The room was spinning. The scars she had felt. The sunken places. They had held him down. They had put hot iron to his back, not a whip. A brand, like cattle. She felt a wave of nausea. She stumbled to the water bucket and splashed icy water on her face. She looked at her reflection in the bucket. The rose of Redstone. The woman who felt sorry for herself because a sheriff had lied to her, because men had beaten her in an alley. She looked at the closed book. She thought of him, alone in the stable, grinding salt into a bullet wound. She thought of his face when he said, "I am not a man anymore." She had not been disgusted by his scars. She had been terrified by the pain that made them. She put the book back, exactly as she had found it. She was trembling. She had touched the core of his darkness, and it had seared her. That evening, when she made dinner, she did something different. She made a thick, hot oatmeal, rich with the last of the molasses. She ladled it into a bowl. She took the bowl and a spoon and walked to his corner. She placed it on the floor, next to his saddlebags. It was an offering, a wordless apology, a recognition. When he came in that night, he stopped. He saw the bowl. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at her. She was sitting on her cot, her back to him, mending a sock. She did not turn around. She heard him pick up the bowl. She heard the scrape of the spoon. He ate it all. The next day, she left the bowl there again, and the next. On the 4th day of this new ritual, he spoke. He was standing by the door, pulling on his gloves. "The wind is shifting to the north," he said. Rosalie, stirring a pot, paused. "Does that mean more snow?" "No," he said. "It means deeper cold. The pass will be ice." It was a conversation. It was thin and brittle, but it was not silence. He wrote less in the journal. She knew, because she did not hear the scratch of the pencil in the late hours. Instead, he began to sit in the chair by the fire. He did not look at her. He looked at the flames, but he was in the room. He was sharing the warmth. He talked, not about himself. He talked about the mountains. "That peak," he said one afternoon, nodding toward the window. "They call it the Widowmaker. The Utes say a spirit lives up there, one that hates men. They're right." He talked about his mule. "Her name is Beatrice. She's smarter than most men I've known. She can smell a bad snow cornice from 50 yards. Rosalie listened. She asked questions about the trail, about the snow, about anything but the war. He was a man coming back to life. Sentence by sentence, he was testing the ground, seeing if it would hold his weight. One evening, the fire sputtered. The stove, a heavy cast-iron beast, suddenly belched a cloud of thick, black smoke into the cabin. Rosalie coughed, waving her apron. "The pipe!" she choked. I think the wind knocked the pipe loose. Eli was on his feet. He grabbed a poker and forced the stove door open. More smoke billowed out. "The damper," he said, his eyes watering. "It's stuck. The hinge is rusted." He grabbed a thick leather glove and reached into the smoke, trying to force the iron plate. It wouldn't budge. "It's hot," he grunted, pulling his hand back. "We need to get it open, or it'll smoke us out." "Water," Rosalie said, grabbing the kettle. "No, it'll crack the iron. We need leverage and oil." For the next hour, they worked. It was a dirty, frustrating job. She brought the lamp close, holding it high so he could see. He worked with a skinning knife from his belt and a hammer from the woodshed, trying to pry the rusted hinge. Soot covered them both. Her hands were black. His face was striped with it. At one point, he was bracing his shoulder against the stove, trying to get a better angle on the hinge. His hand slipped. "Damn it," he hissed. "Here," Rosalie said, grabbing a piece of firewood to use as a lever. "Brace it here. I'll hold it." He repositioned, his body close to hers. His shoulder brushed her arm. She could feel the heat radiating from him. He smelled of pine smoke, soot, and cold leather. "Now," he said, "push." She pushed. He pulled. Their hands met on the piece of wood. His scarred, burned fingers closed over hers. They both froze. It was not like the last time. His hand did not recoil. Her hand did not flinch. They just held. His grip was strong. Hers was steady. The hinge groaned. They looked at each other. His face was inches from hers. The lamplight was in his eyes. And for the first time, she saw the man he had been. The man before Rock Island. They were not the eyes of a dead man. They were the eyes of a man who was terrified of being alive. The moment stretched. The stovepipe creaked. The wind howled. He let go of the wood. She let go. The stove was fixed. It's done," she whispered, her voice husky. "Yes," he said. They stood, breathing in the smoky air, not moving. The wall between them was gone. In its place was something raw and sharp. Eli broke the gaze. He turned, wiping his sooty hands on his trousers. He looked at the fire, now drawing cleanly up the chimney. "You shouldn't," he said, his voice so low she almost didn't hear it. "Shouldn't what?" "Waste your time, fixing stoves, leaving oatmeal." He turned to face her. His eyes were full of a desperate sadness. "You're a good woman, Rosalie. You deserve better than this, better than me. Don't waste your pity on a monster." Rosalie stared at him, the soot on her cheek, the ache in her hands, the journal entries searing her mind. "A monster," she repeated. She shook her head, a small, sad movement. "I told you, Eli, I've known monsters. They don't look like you. They don't hide in stables. They don't carry letters to dead sisters." She took a step toward him. "You want to talk about monsters? I slept with them for 3 years. I let them pay me money to own me for an hour. I smiled. I pretended. I made myself a hollow thing. I did it just to stay alive. Just to get through the night. It was survival. And I hated every second of it." She was close now. She could see the pulse beating in his scarred neck. "Then I came here," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "And I was just surviving again. I was cooking and cleaning and waiting for my life to be over. And then you came, and you're broken. You're scarred. And you're more of a man than Sheriff Mason and all his friends put together." She touched his chest, right over his heart. "I slept with all those men just to survive. But you, Eli, you're the first man who makes me want to live." The confession hung in the air. He looked down at her hand on his chest. He was trembling. He was at war with himself. She could see the battle in his eyes, the hope and the terror of that hope. He did not speak. He acted. He moved, his hands coming up to grip her arms. It was not gentle. It was clumsy and hard and desperate. He pulled her to him. His mouth found hers. It was not a soft kiss. It was a collision. It was awkward and full of pain. His beard was rough against her skin, his lips chapped and hot. It was the kiss of a starving man. It was the kiss of a man who had forgotten how. Rosalie didn't care. She responded with equal force. She kissed him back. She wrapped her arms around his neck, her fingers digging into his hair. She held on as if she were drowning. It was a kiss of shared brokenness. It was powerful. It was real. They broke apart, gasping, their foreheads resting against each other. The cabin was silent, the fire crackling. "Eli," she whispered, her voice shaking. He just held her, his eyes closed tight, as if afraid to open them. She reached up, her hand sooty, and touched the top button of his wool shirt. Her fingers fumbled with it. "Take it off, cowboy," she teased, the words a rough whisper, an echo of a life she used to live. But this time, it was not a joke. It was not a transaction. It was a plea. He went rigid. His eyes opened. The fear was back. "Rosalie." "Please," she said, not a tease, not a demand, just please. He hesitated for a long, agonizing moment. She saw the war. He wanted to. He was terrified to. His hands, scarred and shaking, moved to his chest, slowly, as if each button were a fresh pain. He undid the first, then the second, the third. He pulled the shirt from his shoulders, letting it fall to the floor. He stood before her in the lamplight, his chest bare. It, too, was scarred. An old knife wound near his ribs, the pucker of a bullet on his shoulder. But it was when he turned, just slightly, to move away from the light, that she saw it. The kerosene lamp on the table was low, but it was bright enough. It cast flickering, terrible shadows. It hollowed out the damage. The journal had not lied. Her hand had not lied. But the sight was a new kind of horror. His back was a ruin. It was a landscape of a nightmare. The brands were there, dark, puckered circles of dead skin, but the spaces between them, the flesh was gone. Deep, concave valleys of tissue, as if he had been gouged. The lamplight caught the high ridges of scar tissue and cast the deep hollows into black shadow. It was not a man's back. It was a testament to human cruelty. Rosalie's breath caught in her throat. She heard herself make a small, sharp sound. A gasp. She didn't mean to. It was involuntary. Her hand, the one she had raised to touch him, flew to her mouth. She took one, single, stumbling step backward. He saw it. He had been watching her face. He had been waiting for this. Her involuntary recoil was his verdict. His face, which had been open, vulnerable, and full of a terrible, fragile hope, collapsed. It shut. The light went out. He was gone. "Eli," she whispered, horrified at her own reaction. He did not speak. He bent, his movement stiff, mechanical. He picked up his shirt. He did not look at her. He turned his ruined back to her and put the shirt on. He buttoned it, his fingers sure and steady now. Each button was a lock being fastened. "Eli, no!" she said, her voice breaking. She stepped forward, her hand outstretched. I wasn't." She tried to grab his arm. "Eli, wait, it's not." He pulled his arm away. He didn't push her away, not violently. He just moved it. He moved it out of her reach, as if her touch were a thing he no longer had a right to. She felt a sharp, stabbing pain in her own chest. It was not rejection. It was empathy. It was the horrible, devastating realization that she had just proved him right. She had confirmed his deepest, darkest fear, that he was a monster, that he was unworthy of touch. He picked up his heavy coat and walked to the door. "Eli, please don't," she cried, tears streaming down her sooty cheeks. "I'm sorry, please." He paused at the door, his hand on the latch. He looked back at her, his face a perfect, scarred, empty mask. "Good night, Rosalie," he said, and he stepped out into the freezing dark, closing the door behind him. Rosalie woke to the cold. It was a cold that had nothing to do with the weather. It was the cold of an empty room. The fire in the stove had died to gray-white ash. The cabin was silent, the wind itself having paused, as if holding its breath before a final, brutal assault. Eli was gone. His buffalo coat was gone. His hat was gone. His saddlebags were gone. She sat up on her cot, the blanket pooling around her waist. Her body ached. Her face was stiff from the dried soot and her own tears. Then she saw it. On the table, where the lamp had burned low, was a single piece of paper, torn from his journal. It was weighted down by the harmonica. She moved. Her stockinged feet were numb on the cold floorboards. She reached the table. The words were slashed onto the page in his rough pencil script. Just a few. "I cannot make you disgusted with me anymore." The words hit her harder than Sheriff Mason's fist. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact, a verdict delivered by himself. He had seen her flinch. He had seen her recoil. And she had confirmed his own deepest, darkest truth, that he was a monster. She stood there, frozen. The note in her hand. The silence of the cabin was deafening. He had left. He had gone out into the cold, into the snow-choked pass, with his ruined back and his ruined soul. He had gone to die. A panic, cold and sharp, seized her throat. This was not like Redstone. This was not a betrayal. This was an execution, and she had been the one to swing the axe. "No," she whispered. The sound was thin in the frozen air. "No, Eli." She did not stop for boots. She did not stop for a coat. She threw the cabin door open and ran out onto the snow-covered boardwalk. The cold was a physical blow. It punched the air from her lungs. The sky was a low, bruised, purple-gray. The wind was building again, a high, thin keen from the mouth of the pass. "Eli!" she screamed. The wind tore the name from her lips and threw it back in her face. She ran to the stable. The door was ajar, swinging on one hinge. She plunged inside. Beatrice was gone. The mule stall was empty. The mail satchels were gone. He was not just hiding. He was not waiting in the stable for her to come and apologize. He had left. He had taken his mule, his job, and he had ridden into the teeth of the pass, a pass that Henderson had said was madness to try, a pass that had already killed one man. "You fool," she wept, the tears freezing instantly on her cheeks. "You goddamned, proud, broken fool." She turned and ran back to the kitchen house. Her feet were burning, the snow biting at her ankles. She slammed inside. She moved, her panic giving way to a frantic, clear-headed rage. She pulled on her own thick wool stockings, then forced her feet into her boots, not bothering to lace them. She looked at her own thin coat. It was useless. She saw the heavy buffalo coat he had left behind the night before, when he had fled. It was still on the floor by the door. She grabbed it. She plunged her arms into it. It was huge. It smelled of him, of leather, and cold, and old smoke. It fell to her knees, the sleeves hanging past her hands. She did not care. She grabbed the half-empty bottle of whiskey from the shelf. She grabbed a handful of dried biscuits, stuffing them into the deep pockets. She ran back to the stable. She needed a horse. There were none. Only Mrs. Albright's old mare. Too old to break trail. She would walk. She grabbed a length of rope from a hook on the wall, coiling it and slinging it over her shoulder. She looked at the mouth of the pass. The trail was already invisible. Just a rolling, endless sea of white, broken only by the dark shapes of the pines. She began to run. She did not know how long she walked. The wind rose with the sun, and the snow began to fall again. Not a blizzard. Not yet, but a steady, blinding curtain of white that erased her tracks as soon as she made them. She was following the only path there was, the pass. She knew Beatrice, the mule, would be slow. She prayed he was slow. She fell. She fell into drifts that were up to her waist. She pulled herself out, the heavy coat dragging her down, her lungs burning. The world was white. The sky was white. The ground was white. There was no up, no down. Just the biting wind and the scream of her own fear. "Eli!" she called again, her voice raw. The wind answered. It mocked her. She was a fool. She was a saloon girl, lost in a mountain pass, chasing a ghost. She was going to die. She was going to lie here and freeze, and they would find her in the spring, just like the last courier. She stumbled, falling hard against the exposed rock of the canyon wall. She hit her head. Stars exploded behind her eyes. She slid down into the drift, the world turning soft and gray. It was warm, she thought. It was easy. Just sleep. Just close her eyes. She had tried. She had failed. It was over. Then she heard it. It was not the wind. It was the stamp of a hoof. She forced her eyes open. Through the swirling snow, not 50 yards ahead, was a dark shape. A mule. Beatrice. The mule was standing, head down, unmoving, half buried in a drift. Rosalie cried out, a raw, broken sound. She pushed herself up, her limbs heavy as lead. She stumbled, fell, crawled, and staggered toward the animal. Beatrice, she wept, grabbing the frozen reins. The mule just looked at her with patient, dark eyes. And then she saw him. He was almost completely covered, a dark heap in the snow. Just past the mule, he had fallen. The snow had drifted over him. Eli! She plunged into the drift, her hands digging, throwing snow aside. She found his shoulder. She clawed the snow away from his face. His skin was gray, his beard caked in ice. He was not moving. No, she sobbed. No, you don't. You don't get to do this. She grabbed his shoulders and pulled. He was a dead weight. She was not strong enough. She looked around. The mule had slipped on a patch of ice-covered scree. Eli had been thrown, or had fallen. His right leg was twisted beneath him at an angle that made her stomach turn. He was alive. She saw the faint, faint puff of vapor from his mouth. I am not, she grunted, pulling. Letting you die. She unslung the rope from her shoulder. Her fingers were numb, clumsy. She looped it under his arms, across his chest. She tied a thick, clumsy knot. She took the other end and walked to the mule. Come on, Beatrice, she begged, tying the rope to the saddle horn. Come on, girl, pull. You have to pull. She slapped the mule's frozen flank. Beatrice grunted, dug in her hooves, and strained. The rope went taut. Eli's body moved, sliding free of the drift. Rosalie scrambled back to him. He was free, but he was unconscious. His leg was a ruin. She could not get him on the mule's back. Not alone, not here. She looked at the cabin. She could just see the chimney smoke, a dark smudge against the gray sky. It was less than half a mile. It had felt like 100. She untied him from the saddle. She would drag him. She put the rope over her own shoulder, a makeshift harness. She wrapped the other end around his chest. I'm sorry, Eli, she whispered, her teeth chattering. This is going to hurt. She pulled. He moved an inch. She pulled again. She dug her heels in. She fell to her knees. She crawled, the rope biting into her shoulder, her muscles screaming. He moved. Foot by foot, yard by yard. She pulled her broken man home. Beatrice followed behind, a silent, patient shadow. It took 2 hours. 2 hours of pulling, falling, weeping, and pulling again. She dragged him across the boardwalk and through the cabin door. He was a dead weight of wet wool and ice. She collapsed on the floor, gasping. She lay there for a full minute, the world spinning. Then she got up. She slammed the door against the rising wind. She kicked the snow-covered logs into the stove, adding kindling until the fire roared back to life. She turned to him. He was still unconscious. She used his own skinning knife to cut the rope away. She cut his trousers, from ankle to thigh. His leg was a nightmare, swollen, dark purple. The bone clearly snapped below the knee. She found the splints Henderson kept in the stable. She had seen him set a cow's leg once. She took the whiskey. She poured half of it down Eli's throat. He choked, but did not wake. She poured the other half over her hands. She set the bone. He screamed, a high, thin, animal sound. His back arched off the floor. His eyes snapped open, but they were blind, seeing only the white-hot flash of agony. Then he was gone again, passed out. Rosalie was shaking, sick to her stomach, but she kept working. She bound the splints tight. She dragged him, inch by inch, to her cot. She rolled him onto it. She worked for 2 days. She did not sleep. She fed the fire. She melted snow for water. He burned with fever. He thrashed, his body rigid, his hands clenching at the blankets. He spoke. He spoke to his sister. "Sarah, I'm coming. Just hold on. Don't go." He spoke to his captors. "No, please, not again, not the—" He cried out, a low, constant moan of pain. Rosalie sat by the cot. She bathed his face, the scarred side and the unscarred. She held his hand, the burned one, and did not let go. She forced broth, spoonful by spoonful, between his cracked lips. She watched the ruin of his back rise and fall with his labored breathing. She watched the man who thought he was a monster fight his way back from a death he had chosen. On the 3rd morning, the fever broke. The wind had finally died. The cabin was quiet. Rosalie was slumped in the chair, her head on the edge of the cot, her hand still holding his. She felt him move. She snapped awake. His eyes were open. They were clear. They were looking at her. He knew where he was. He looked at the splint on his leg. He looked at her exhausted, soot-stained face. He remembered. He tried to sit up, his face contorting in pain. "Don't move," she said, her voice a rough croak. He stopped, but he turned his face away from her. The shame returned, a dark flush on his pale skin. He would not look at her. Rosalie stared at the back of his head. All her fear, her exhaustion, her rage, coalesced into a single, hard, clear thought. "You are a coward, Eli Vance." He flinched, as if she had hit him. He turned back, his eyes wide, confused. "You can survive Rock Island," she said, her voice low and trembling with a cold anger. "You can survive branding, and starvation, and a war. You can survive a broken leg and a blizzard. But you cannot survive one woman's pity. You cannot survive being seen." She stood up, looming over him. "You ran," she hissed. "You ran because I gasped, because I was shocked, because for 1 second I saw the pain you carry, and it scared me. You would rather freeze to death in a canyon than face one person who knows what was done to you." He just stared at her, his face pale, his lips bloodless. "Well, I will not have it," she said. "I did not drag you half a mile through a blizzard. I did not set your goddamn leg. I did not sit here for 2 days watching you shake and moan, just so you could turn your face to the wall." She leaned in close, her voice a whisper, but harder than steel. "If you die, you will die here, but you will not die because you are afraid of being loved. If you do that, Eli, if you let your shame kill you, I swear to God, I will never forgive you." He looked at her. He saw the tears on her face. He saw the fury in her eyes. He saw the woman who had pulled him back from the white, empty peace he had craved. His face, the hard, scarred mask, crumpled. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The words were choked, broken. "Rosalie, I'm sorry." It was the first time, the first true apology. I didn't mean to," he stammered. "Be disgusted?" she finished for him, her voice softening. "Eli, I was not disgusted. I was horrified. I was horrified that any man could do that to another. It's not the scars," he whispered, his eyes closing, a tear forcing its way through the scarred tissue at the corner of his eye. "You don't know. You don't know the worst of it." "Then tell me," she said. She sat on the edge of the cot. "Tell me. I'm not going anywhere." He was silent for a long time. The only sound was the drip of melting ice from the eaves. "In the prison," he began, his voice a raw rasp. "In the winter of '64, it was the coldest winter. They They stopped feeding us. Not almost. They just stopped. For weeks. We ate bark. We ate our boots. He was looking at the ceiling, his eyes seeing a different room, a different, colder hell. Men died. Every night. We would wake up, and the man next to us would be frozen solid. There was a man, Corporal Hayes, from Georgia. He had a wife. He talked about her. He died. He was next to me. He was dead for 2 days. We were too weak to move him. Rosalie waited. She knew, with a sick certainty, what was coming. She just held his hand, tighter. "I was so hungry," Eli whispered. It's not a feeling. It's a madness. It eats your brain. It eats who you are. All there is the hunger." He stopped. He could not say it. "Eli," she prompted gently, "tell me." He turned his head and looked at her. His eyes were the eyes of a damned man, begging for absolution or condemnation. He did not care which. "He was frozen. His hand, it was just there. I had my knife. I cut the flesh from his hand." He choked, a dry, racking sob. "I hid under my blanket," he whispered, the tears streaming down his face now, washing the grime away. "And I ate the flesh of a dead man. Rosalie, to stay alive. I am that. That is what I am. That is the monster you touched." He broke the wall of silence, the granite of his past. It did not just crumble, it exploded. He wept. He turned his face into the thin pillow, his whole body shaking with the force of sobs held back for a decade. He cried for his sister, for Corporal Hayes, for the boy from Georgia, and for the man he had become. Rosalie did not flinch. She did not gasp. She did not pull her hand away. She let him cry. She waited until the great, shuddering sobs quieted to ragged breaths. Then she moved. She climbed onto the narrow cot beside him. Careful of his leg, she lay beside him. She put her arm over his chest, and she pulled his head against her shoulder. She held him. She held all of him. The soldier, the prisoner, the courier, the monster. She held him, and she cried with him. She cried for his pain, and for her own, and for the simple, terrible fact of being alive in such a cruel world. They lay like that for hours, in the dark, the fire burning low, the wind rising outside. Later that night, the cabin was warm. The lamp was lit. He had eaten broth. He was quiet, his eyes clear. He was empty. Rosalie sat by the fire, watching him. He was weak, but he was there. She stood up. She walked to the cot. He watched her, his eyes full of a new, fragile apprehension. She did not speak. She reached for the buttons of his shirt. He did not stop her. He did not flinch. He just watched her face. She unbuttoned the shirt. She pulled it open. She looked. This time, there was no hesitation, no gasp. She saw the ruin of his back. She saw the brands, the hollows, the terrible tangled map of his suffering. She bent her head, and she kissed the first scar. She kissed the puckered, dark circle of the brand. She tasted the salt of his skin. He sucked in a sharp, shuddering breath, but did not move. She kissed the next one. She moved from the ruin of his shoulder, down his spine. She kissed the hollowed-out flesh. She kissed the raised, ropey ridges. She was not healing him. She knew that. These wounds were too deep. They were part of him, part of the earth, part of the man. No, she was not healing. She was accepting. She was telling him, wordlessly, what he needed to hear, that he was not a monster, that he was not disgusting, that he was a man, and he was alive, and he was here. When she was done, she raised her head. He was looking at her, his face undone, tears tracking silently into his beard. "Rosalie," he whispered. She kissed his mouth. It was not the clumsy, desperate collision of before. It was slow. It was deep. It was a promise. She pulled the blankets back. She lay beside him, her hand on his chest, feeling the hammer of his heart. They moved. It was awkward. His leg was splinted. Her body was sore. They were two broken people, fumbling in the lamplight. But it was powerful. It was a trembling, desperate act. It was not about pleasure. It was about life. It was a fierce, defiant claim against the darkness that had tried to swallow them both. His rough, scarred hands touched her skin, not with shame, but with a sense of wonder. Her hands touched his back, not with pity, but with a raw, defiant possession. They were two people, checking in the dark, in the quiet of the cabin, to see if they were still human. They were. After, they lay tangled in the blankets, the firelight playing over the walls. The wind howled, but it could not get in. Rosalie was pressed against his side, her head on his shoulder. He was on his back, staring at the ceiling. She felt his chest rise and fall in a long, shuddering breath. It was a sigh that seemed to begin 10 years ago. In a prison camp in Illinois, it was the sound of a man letting go, of a past that had weighed more than any mountain. He turned his head, his lips brushing her hair, and then, for the first time since she had met him, Eli Vance slept, a true sleep, deep and dreamless and safe. The thaw came not as a gentle promise, but as a messy, brutal unraveling. The world, which had been clean and white and silent, became a gray, dripping, muddy ruin. The snowpack, which had been 10 feet deep, turned to heavy, wet slush. The cabin, which had been their fortress, became a damp, leaking box. They could hear the pass opening. The sound was like distant artillery, the crack and groan of ice dams breaking, the roar of meltwater flooding the canyon. The world was returning, whether they wanted it to or not. Eli's leg was mending. He had carved a new crutch from a thick piece of pine, and he moved with a grim, limping determination. The splint was a permanent fixture, but he was no longer confined to the cot. He slept there, but Rosalie slept with him. The narrow space was a comfort, a shared island of warmth in the damp cold. They had settled into a new silence, a silence of shared bodies, of simple tasks. She would shave him, her steady hand scraping the razor over his scarred cheek, and he would close his eyes, trusting her. He would sit by the fire, his bad leg propped up, methodically cleaning and oiling the guns. His and hers, the heavy Winchester she had claimed from Mrs. Albright's wall. The intimacy of the rescue, the shared confessions, the raw, trembling coupling. It had not faded. It had settled. It was a fact, solid as the log walls. He was her man. She was his woman. It was a thing that did not need to be spoken of. It simply was. But the returning world brought noise. One afternoon, a week after the pass had begun to clear, they heard a shout. It was not Eli's name. It was Henderson's. "Mrs. Albright! Rosalie! Are you in there?" Henderson burst through the door, his face ruddy, his eyes wide. He was followed by Mrs. Albright herself, a tiny, tough woman wrapped in a bearskin coat, holding a shotgun. They stopped, taking in the scene. The cabin was clean. Rosalie was stirring a pot, and Eli, the scarred courier, was sitting at the table, his splinted leg propped on a stool, a cup of coffee in his hand. "Sweet Mother of God," Mrs. Albright breathed, lowering the shotgun. "You're alive." Henderson just stared. We thought we thought you were gone." "The pass was shut," Rosalie said simply, her voice calm. "We managed." Henderson looked from Rosalie to Eli, and a slow, dawning comprehension spread across his face. He saw the single cot, the way Eli's coat was hanging next to hers, the easy, worn silence between them. "Well, I'll be," he muttered. "You brought supplies?" Rosalie asked, turning back to her pot. "Aye, Mrs. Albright said, stepping forward. Flour, salt, bacon, and news. Eli looked up. He had not spoken. He just watched. The pass is open, but it's not safe, the old woman said, setting a heavy sack on the floor. The thaw has brought out the wolves, and worse than wolves. Indians? Rosalie asked. No, Henderson said, his voice dropping. Outlaws, the Calloway gang. Eli's hand, the one holding the coffee cup, went still. They wintered up in the Wind River Range, Henderson continued. And they've come down hungry. They hit the Miller homestead 2 days ago, burned the barn, took all their stock. They're riding south, right into this territory. Rosalie looked at Eli. His face was unreadable. He had not moved. He was listening, his whole body a coiled spring. They're a bad lot. Mrs., Albright said, spitting into the hearth. Led by a man named Pike, a one-eared devil. They say he was a guard at a prison camp during the war. A man who learned to like hurting. Eli set his cup on the table. The sound was a sharp, final click in the quiet room. Pike, he said. His voice was flat. You know him? Henderson asked. I know him, Eli said. He looked at Mrs. Albright. One ear, a left-handed gun, a scar on his chin. Looks like a fish hook. Mrs. Albright nodded, her eyes narrowing. That's the man. He's the man who held the brand, Eli said. The words fell into the cabin like stones. Rosalie's hand flew to her mouth. Henderson and Mrs. Albright just looked confused. I'm going, Eli said. He grabbed his new crutch and pushed himself to his feet. Eli, Rosalie said, her voice sharp. Your leg, you can't. My leg will hold, he said. He limped to the peg where his gun belt hung. Son. Mrs., Albright said, stepping in front of him. This ain't your fight. You're a courier. The mail's been stacked up for a month. This is a job for a marshal, for the army. The army ain't here, Eli said, strapping the gun belt around his waist. And the marshal is 100 miles away. That man is here, now. It's my fight. Eli, no, Rosalie pleaded. She grabbed his arm. The good one. What are you going to do? You're one man. Your leg is broken. You'll get yourself killed. For what? For revenge. He stopped. He turned and looked at her. His eyes were not the eyes of the man who had wept in her arms. They were the eyes of the man from Rock Island, the man who had survived. It was a cold, dead, terrible calm. He's not just in my past, Rosalie, he said, his voice low. As long as he's out there. He's in my head. He's in this cabin. He's at this table. I can still smell the smoke. I can't live with that. Not anymore. I can't be here. He motioned between her and him. And have him in the world. One of us has to go. She saw it. The intractable, unchangeable will. The thing that had kept him alive. It would now. She feared. Get him killed. I can't stop you, she said, her voice breaking. No, he said. He touched her cheek, his scarred fingers gentle. But you can stay here and be safe. He turned to Henderson. Saddle Beatrice and Mrs. Albright's mare. The mare? Henderson asked. I can't ride Beatrice with this leg. Eli said. The mare is steady. Beatrice will just carry the mail. I'm taking it through. That's my job. He was lying. Rosalie knew it. He was giving her a reason, a cover story. But she also knew he wasn't taking the mare for himself. He limped out the door, toward the stable. Rosalie watched him go, her heart a cold stone in her chest. He's a fool. Mrs., Albright said, her voice quiet. He'll be dead by sundown. Yes, Rosalie said. She turned, her face a pale, hard mask. She walked to the wall where the Winchester rested. She picked it up. She checked the load. What do you think you're doing, girl? Mrs. Albright snapped. He's a fool, Rosalie said, slinging her own thin coat on. But he's my fool, and he's right about one thing. He'll need someone to watch his back. She grabbed the heavy buffalo coat, the one he had worn, the one she had worn. She put it on over her own. It was her armor. You're as mad as he is, Henderson said. Probably, Rosalie said. She strode out the door, the rifle heavy in her hands. She found him in the stable, tying his saddlebags onto the mare. He looked up as she entered. He saw the rifle. He saw the coat. He saw her face. Rosalie, no, I told you. This is my road. And I'm walking it with you, she said, her voice flat. You think I let you live just to watch you die? You think I faced down my own past just to let you get swallowed by yours? This isn't Redstone, he snarled. This isn't a fist fight in an alley. This is killing. This is Pike. He will gut you, Rosalie. He will. He will do to you what he did to me. Then he'll have to get through me first, she said. She grabbed the reins of Beatrice. I'm a good shot, Mrs. Albright taught me. I can shoot wolves, or men who act like them. We're wasting time. He stared at her for a long, hard moment. He saw the iron in her spine. It was a mirror of his own. He had no more words to fight her with. He just nodded. Once. He hauled himself into the mare's saddle, his face tight with the pain from his leg. Rosalie mounted the mule. They rode out of the station, side by side, leaving Henderson and Mrs. Albright standing in the mud, shaking their heads. They rode north into the high canyons, following the trail Henderson had pointed out. The world was ugly. Gray, melting snow, dark rock, the smell of mud and rot. Eli rode in silence, his eyes scanning the ridgelines. He was a soldier again. After 2 hours, Rosalie smelled it. Smoke, not the clean scent of pine. This was the acrid, sickening smell of a house fire. Eli smelled it too. He urged the mare over a rise. They saw the homestead, or what was left of it. The cabin was a smoldering ruin. The barn was gone. A woman was sitting on the ground, rocking, a high, thin keen coming from her throat. A man was lying nearby, his chest a dark, bloody stain. Rosalie was off the mule before it even stopped. She ran to the woman. It was Mrs. Miller, the woman Henderson had spoken of. They took everything, the woman wept, not even looking up. They took my boy, my Sammy. Eli had dismounted. He limped to the man. He was dead, shot in the chest. Eli's face, which had been hard, now became something else. It became hollow. This was not a memory. This was real. Pike, he said. It was not a question. He laughed. The woman choked, pointing. He had one ear. He laughed while he shot Jeb. He laughed. Rosalie knelt beside her, her hands useless. There was nothing to fix, nothing to mend. They're gone, Eli said. He was looking at the ground. Tracks, a dozen horses, maybe more, heading north, deeper into the canyons. They took your boy. He's just 10. She wept. They said they needed a camp boy. They just took him. Eli's gaze lifted from the tracks to the horizon. The last of his doubt, the last of Rosalie's arguments, burned away. This was not about revenge anymore. This was not about his past. This was about a boy named Sammy. He looked at Rosalie. His eyes were clear. Take her back to the station. No, Rosalie said. I'm going with you. This ain't a request, he growled. She'll die out here. She's in shock. Take her back. Get Henderson. Get a posse. There's no time, Rosalie said, her voice fierce. By the time a posse gets here, that boy he'll be like you, or dead. I'm going with you. She, Rosalie pointed at the weeping woman, can ride Beatrice. The mule knows the way. She'll get back." Eli looked at the woman, then at Rosalie. He saw the cold, hard, practical truth in her eyes. It was a brutal choice. "Get on the mule, ma'am," Eli said to the woman, his voice gentle for the first time. "It will take you to the station. Go, now." He helped the woman onto Beatrice's back. She was light, a ghost. My Jeb," she whispered. "We'll come back for him," Eli said. "Go!" He slapped the mule's rump. Beatrice, steady as a clock, turned and began the walk back. Rosalie was already on the mare. She had the rifle out. Eli took a breath, the pain in his leg a white-hot fire. He hauled himself up behind her, onto the mare's rump. "I can't ride and shoot," he said. "You ride, I'll shoot." "Go," he said. Rosalie kicked the mare into a trot, following the tracks. They found them an hour later, tucked into a box canyon, an old trapper's cabin. They could see the horses, their own stolen stock among them. They could hear rough laughter. "They're drunk," Eli whispered, his voice in her ear. "They think they're safe." "Where's the boy?" Rosalie whispered back. "By the fire. I see him. He's stirring a pot. He's alive." "How many?" "I count 5, Eli said, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. "1 at the fire with the boy, 4 inside the cabin." "What's the plan?" "You're going to ride," he said. "Ride past the mouth of the canyon. Fast. Yell. Draw them out. When they come out, I'm going in. For the boy." "You'll be killed," she said. "They'll be looking at you," he said. "Just ride, Rosalie, ride like hell, and don't look back." "No, I'm not leaving you." "You are," he said. He grabbed her shoulder. "This is the only way. Save the boy. Do you understand me? Save the boy. The rest, it doesn't matter." She looked at him. She saw the truth. He was giving her a choice. "All right," she whispered. "God help you, Eli." "He already did," he said, his hand touching her hair. Just once. He slid off the mare, landing hard, his leg buckling. He stifled a groan. He crawled behind a low ridge of rock, his pistol in his hand. "Now!" Rosalie screamed, a high, wild sound. She kicked the mare, and the horse, panicked, bolted. She rode right across the mouth of the canyon, yelling, the Winchester held high. "What in the hell?" a voice roared from the cabin. A man stumbled out, a bottle in his hand. "It's a woman!" Another man came out. "Get her!" 2 of them ran for their horses. Eli moved. He did not limp. He ran, dragging his splinted leg. A terrible, lurching gait. He ran straight for the fire, where the boy stood, frozen, and the single guard was staring at Rosalie. Eli shot the guard in the back. The man fell into the fire. Eli grabbed the boy. "Sammy, run!" he hissed. "Run to the horses! Get on one! Anyone! Run!" The boy, terrified, scrambled away. "Pike!" one of the men shouted. Seeing Eli, "It's a trap." Eli turned, firing. He shot one of the men running for his horse. The man went down. He was exposed, in the middle of the camp. The 2 men from the cabin, and the 1 from the horses, all turned their guns on him. A shot rang out, but it wasn't from them. It was from the ridge. Rosalie! She hadn't run. She had circled back. She was lying on her belly on the ridge. The Winchester sighted. One of the men crumpled. "Damn you, woman!" Eli roared, diving behind an overturned wagon as bullets splintered the wood. Now it was a real fight. Eli and Rosalie, hidden against the last 2 men. "Pike!" one of them yelled. "Pike, get out here!" The cabin door opened. Pike stepped out. He was just as Eli remembered, one-eared, a heavy revolver in his hand. He looked around, his eyes taking in the scene. He saw the dead men. He saw Eli crouched behind the wagon. "Vance," he sneered. "Elias Vance, I knew I should have put a bullet in you. They told me you died. Looks like I didn't brand you deep enough." "You talk too much then. Pike," Eli called out, reloading his pistol. "And you talk too much now." Pike laughed. "I remember you, crying for your sister, crying for your mammy. You were weak. And look at you now, hiding behind a wagon. And a woman." He saw Rosalie on the ridge. He raised his pistol and fired. The shot kicked up dirt, inches from her head. Rosalie fired back. The heavy rifle bucked, and the shot went wide. "Eli!" she screamed. It was the distraction Eli needed. He burst from behind the wagon, his bad leg forgotten, running, firing. Pike turned, surprised. He fired. Eli felt a punch in his left shoulder, a white-hot agony that spun him around. He fell. His pistol skittered away. Pike laughed, walking toward him, raising his gun for the killing shot. "This time, Vance, you stay dead." "No!" Rosalie screamed. Pike looked up at the ridge. He smiled at her. "You're next, sweetheart." He turned his gun back to Eli. A shot, not from the rifle. Eli, on the ground, had pulled his skinning knife from his belt. He had thrown it. It was a soldier's last, desperate move. The knife spun and buried itself, thunk, deep in Pike's chest. Pike stopped. He looked down at the handle protruding from his ribs. He looked at Eli. He did not look angry. He just looked surprised. He took 2 steps and fell, face first, into the mud, dead. The last man, seeing Pike fall, threw his gun down. "Don't shoot! I give! I give!" Silence. The canyon was deathly quiet. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the whimpering of the boy. Sammy, who was hiding behind the horses. Rosalie scrambled down the ridge, her rifle forgotten. She ran to Eli. "You're hit," she wept, tearing at his shirt. "It's the shoulder," he grunted, his face pale, sweat on his brow. It's all right. He's gone." "Don't shoot!" the survivor yelled again. He was a young man, covered in filth, his hands high in the air. He looked at Eli, bleeding on the ground. He looked at Pike, dead with a knife in his chest. And then he looked at Rosalie, her face fierce, her hands covered in Eli's blood. His eyes widened, not in fear, but in a strange, sneering recognition. "I know you," he said, his voice shaky, but laced with a sudden, nasty confidence. "You're the Rose of Redstone, from the Red Garter, Mason's whore." Rosalie froze. Her blood turned to ice. She had forgotten this, forgotten that the whole world knew her. "I'll be damned." The man sneered, getting to his feet. "Run out of Redstone. Were you and shacked up with this?" He kicked at Pike's body, then gestured to Eli. "A one-legged, scarred-up freak. How much does he pay you? Rose? Or is he so ugly you just do it for pity?" Rosalie stood up, slowly. The mask she had worn in Redstone, the stone-cold face, settled over her. She walked, not to Eli, but to where Pike's revolver lay in the mud. She picked it up. She turned it in her hand. "You have no idea," she said, her voice dead. "Oh, I got an idea." The man laughed, his courage returning. "You're used goods, sweetheart, and he's a monster. A perfect pair of freaks. The whore and the corpse." Rosalie raised the gun. She cocked the hammer. The click was loud in the canyon. She aimed it at the man's chest. She was going to kill him. She was going to erase Redstone. She was going to kill the man who had seen her, and seen him, and named them. "Rosalie." Eli's voice. It was weak, strained with pain. She didn't look at him. "He deserves it." "Yes," Eli said. "He does. Don't." He called me." "I heard what he called you," Eli said, pushing himself up on his good elbow. "I know what you are. Rosalie. And it ain't that." He held her gaze. His face was pale, but his eyes were clear. "I just killed a man," he said, "for what he did to me. I've been waiting to do it for 5 years, and he's dead, and I'm bleeding, and it didn't fix anything. It just ended it. Don't you start something new." He looked at the man, who was now frozen, realizing his mistake. "Don't become him," Eli whispered. "Don't let them make you this." Rosalie looked at the man's terrified face. She looked at the gun in her hand. She looked at Eli, the man she had pulled from the snow, the man who had pulled her from her own past. She let out a long, shuddering breath. The mask cracked, the stone dissolved. She lowered the gun. She uncocked the hammer and let it fall from her hand. She turned to the survivor. "Get out," she said. The man stared, uncomprehending. "Take a horse," Eli grated, "and ride. And you tell them. You tell everyone you meet. You tell them what you saw here. You tell them about the scarred man and the woman from Redstone. You tell them, we let you go." The man scrambled to his feet. He ran, grabbing the nearest horse, and rode out of the canyon as if the devil himself were after him. Rosalie turned back to Eli. She helped him to his feet. The boy, Sammy, ran to them, crying. They were all alive. They rode back in the twilight. It was a slow, painful procession. Eli and the boy rode the mare. Rosalie rode Beatrice. They led the stolen horses. They did not speak. The silence was vast, as wide as the purple sky. But it was not the cold silence of strangers. It was not the angry silence of a fight. It was the deep, empty, clean silence of an ended thing. They rode back to the station. They were just 2 people, wounded and tired, heading home. It was a quiet that felt, for the first time, like peace. Spring did not come gently. It tore the winter from the mountains with a wet, muddy violence. The silence of the snow was replaced by the roar of water. The pass, which had been a white highway of death, became a treacherous, sucking bog. The ice on the peaks cracked and fell in great, booming avalanches, the sound rolling down the canyon like thunder. The world was being reborn, and it was a painful, messy business. The station was an island in a sea of mud, but the mud was a sign of life. Rosalie found the head of a spade in the back of the stable. Its handle rotted to nothing. Eli took a length of cured ash and sat for a day, carving a new handle. He worked with his knife, his scarred hands moving with a slow, patient deliberation. He was not a man who rushed. He had learned patience in the worst way imaginable. When he was done, he handed it to her. The wood was smooth, warm from his hands. She went to the small patch of land behind the kitchen house, the only ground that got full sun. She began to dig. The ground was mean, full of stones and the stubborn roots of mountain weeds. She fought it. For 3 days. She fought it. She clawed the rocks out, her hands blistering, her back aching. She was not just planting. She was claiming. She was putting down roots in the most stubborn soil on earth. Eli watched her. His leg was mending. The splint was off, replaced by a thick bandage. He walked with a heavy, permanent limp, but he no longer used the crutch. He was a man marked but mobile. He did not help her with the garden. It was hers. He began his own project. He found some old, seasoned pine planks that Henderson had kept, planning to build a new water trough. Eli salvaged them. He sat on the boardwalk in the weak spring sun, and he began to build a bench. He worked with the same slow, methodical care he had used on the spade handle. He measured, he sawed, he hammered. He was not building a rough trapper's seat. He was building a piece of furniture. It was solid. It had a back. It had armrests. He built it facing east, looking down the valley, away from the pass. He was building a place to watch the sun rise, not a place to watch the storms come in. The world was returning, and with it came people. The first to arrive was Henderson, leading a pack mule. He brought the supplies Mrs. Albright had promised: sacks of flour, beans, coffee, and a small tin of seeds for Rosalie's garden. He also brought the story. "The man you let go," he said, sipping Rosalie's coffee at the table. "He made it to Miller's Fork, half-frozen crazy. Told everyone." Rosalie tensed, looking at Eli. "He told them," Henderson said, his eyes wide. "About Pike, about how you two took down the whole gang. He said he saw the devil himself rise up, scarred and shot, and throw a knife clean through Pike's heart. He said he saw a red-haired angel on the ridge, firing a Winchester like a soldier." Eli just grunted, drinking his coffee. "The town," Henderson shook his head. "They don't know what to make of it, but young Sammy Miller is home. His ma's telling everyone you're both heroes." "We're not heroes," Eli said, his voice flat. "We were just there." "Well, you're something," Henderson said. He looked around the cabin, at the clean floor, the bench just outside the window, the neat stack of wood. "Place looks different." The kitchen house was no longer just a way station. It was their home. The traffic started a week later. The pass was finally clear enough for wagons. Prospectors heading for the high country. Merchants, families moving west. The station was busy. Busier than it had been in a year. And the people who stopped, they were different. They came to the kitchen house, hats in hand. They came for Rosalie's food, her bread, which was dense and sweet, her stews, which were thick with the last of the winter's salt pork. They called her Ma'am, or Mrs. Vance. She did not correct them. They talked. They had heard the story. But the story had already faded, replaced by the simple, immediate needs of the present. They wanted food. They wanted warmth. The women, especially Mrs. Miller, the woman from the burned-out homestead, came by with her son. The boy, Sammy, was quiet, but he ran straight to Eli and hugged his leg. Eli, awkward, patted the boy's head. Mrs. Miller had tears in her eyes. She pressed a small cloth packet into Rosalie's hand. "It's not much," she whispered. "Cuttings from my mother's rose bush, the only thing that survived the fire. I wanted you to have them for your garden." Rosalie held the small, thorny sticks. She looked at Mrs. Miller. This woman had seen her own husband murdered, and she was giving her roses. "Thank you, Sarah," Rosalie said, using her first name. No one spoke of Redstone. No one whispered the name Rose. That woman, the one who had lived in perfume and silk, was a ghost. She had died in the alley. She had been buried in the snow. Rosalie, the cook, the woman with dirt under her fingernails and a garden to tend, was the one who was real. Eli found his own place. The spring melt had been hard. The main bridge over the creek, the one that connected the station to the main road, had been washed out. A section of it was gone, leaving a 10-foot gap of churning, brown water. The men from the valley, prospectors and homesteaders, gathered to fix it. It was a clumsy, angry effort. They were arguing. They didn't know how to brace the new pylons against the current. Eli limped down, his axe in his hand. The men stopped talking, looking at him, at his face, at his limp. "You're doing it wrong," Eli said, his voice quiet. A big man, the one who seemed to be in charge, spat into the mud. "And what do you know, courier?" "I know water," Eli said. "And I know wood. You brace it like that. The first log that comes down river will take it out again. You have to build a breakwater upstream, and you angle the brace against the flow." "Not with it. Give me the rope." He didn't wait for an answer. He limped to the pile of timber, picked up the heavy rope, and began tying a knot. It was a complex, strong knot, one they had never seen. "I learned this in the war," he said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "We built bridges, and we burned them." He taught them. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't give orders. He just showed them. He sat on a stump, his bad leg propped up, and he directed the work. He showed them how to sink the posts, how to tie the braces, how to use the river's own strength against itself. They worked for 2 days. Eli was the first one there in the morning, the last one to leave. When it was done, the bridge was stronger than it had ever been. It was ugly, but it was solid. The big foreman, Silas, the one who had challenged him, came over. He wiped his hands on his pants and offered Eli a flat tin of tobacco. Eli shook his head. "Don't chew." Silas nodded, putting the tin away. "Vance," he said. He looked, not at Eli's face, but at his eyes. "You're a good man to have in a fight, and a good man to have on a bridge." He clapped Eli on his good shoulder. "We thank you." Eli just nodded. He picked up his axe and limped back to the cabin. He was no longer the scarred freak. He was no longer the ghost of the pass. He was Eli Vance, the man who knew how to build a bridge. He was a survivor. That evening, the new courier came through. He was a young, fast-talking man from Cheyenne. He had a full sack of mail, the first real mail in months. He had a stack for the station, and one letter, addressed in a neat, spidery hand, to Miss Rosalie Dubois, Red Garter Saloon, Redstone, forwarded. Rosalie's breath caught. She took the letter. She had not seen her maiden name in 5 years. She waited until the courier had eaten and gone. Eli was in the stable, tending to the mare. She sat at the table, the lamp lit, and opened the envelope. It was from her cousin Martha in Helena, Montana. "My dearest Rosalie, I heard what happened. That cur Mason, I never trusted him. I hope you got out of that town with your skin. I am writing to you." The letter was an offer. Martha's husband had died, left her a small sum. She wanted to open a diner, a respectable one, the Helena Griddle. She needed a partner, a cook. "It's a new town. Rosalie," she wrote, "a good town. You could come here. No one knows you. We could make a clean start. We could be respectable. We could make a good living, just us two. Please say you will come." Rosalie read the letter 3 times. Helena, a new life, a clean start, a diner, respectability. It was everything she had ever dreamed of. It was the white picket fence Mason had promised her. She folded the letter. She looked around the small, smoky cabin. She looked at her cot, where Eli's blanket was still thrown over the end. She looked at the shelf where his harmonica sat next to her tin of seeds. She walked to the door and looked out. The sun was going down. The bench Eli had built was sitting in the twilight, waiting. She could see her garden, a patch of dark, turned earth. She could smell the pine smoke from the chimney. She heard Eli in the stable, his voice a low, gentle rumble as he spoke to the horses. She had a clean start. She was respectable. She had a home. She went back inside. She took the letter from her cousin Martha, the offer of a new life, and she fed it to the flames in the stove. Eli came in late. He was tired. The work on the station was hard, and his leg ached in the cool night air. He washed his hands and face in the basin, the water splashing. She had dinner waiting, a thick stew, fresh bread. He ate, his hunger real. After, they did not speak. The cabin was quiet. The lamp burned low, casting its warm, yellow circle. It was the same light, the same cabin. He sat on the edge of the cot, pulling off his boots. His back was to her. He was just a man, tired from a long day's work. Rosalie came and stood behind him. He paused, his boot half off. She put her hands on his shoulders. She felt the warmth of him through the thin wool shirt. "Take it off, Cowboy," she whispered. The words were the same, but they were not a tease. They were not a plea. They were a simple, quiet invitation. He stopped moving. He did not stiffen. He did not freeze. He just waited. Then, slowly, he turned his head. He looked up at her over his shoulder. He was not at war. The fear was gone. He was not the man who had run into the snow. A slow smile touched his mouth. It was a small, tired, real smile. It crinkled the scar at the corner of his eye. "Yes, ma'am," he said. his voice a low rumble. He did not hesitate. He did not look away. He stood, his hands going to the buttons of his shirt. He unfastened them, one by one. He pulled the shirt from his shoulders, letting it fall. He stood before her, in the lamplight. He did not hide. She did not kiss his scars. She did not need to. They were just him. She laid her hands on his chest, her palms flat against his skin. She leaned her head against him, hearing the strong, slow, steady beat of his heart. He put his arms around her, his scarred hands, the ones that had been burned and broken, held her gently. They made love. It was not the desperate, frantic coupling of survivors. It was not the clumsy, painful kiss of strangers. It was slow. It was deep. It was complete. It was the quiet, sure, and gentle love of two people who had nothing to hide and nothing left to fear. It was a homecoming. Later, they sat on the bench he had built. The night air was cool, and she wore his old buffalo coat over her nightdress. They shared a blanket, their shoulders touching. The sky was clear, the stars so bright they looked like holes punched in the black. They sat in silence for a long time. It was a full silence, a peaceful silence. Eli looked up at the mountains, at the dark, jagged line of the pass. "No one," he said, his voice quiet, "can ever change the past." He was not saying it in anger or in sorrow. It was just a fact. The scars, the brands, the ghosts, they were real. They would always be real. Rosalie leaned her head on his shoulder. She looked down the valley, toward the dark, sleeping homesteads, toward her own small, sleeping garden. "No," she said softly, "but they can choose who they want to live the future with." He took her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. They sat and watched the moon rise, casting the valley in clean, silver light. The wind in the pines sounded like a sigh. The sky above them was vast, a deep, abiding red on the horizon. The last glow of the sunset, it was like a light, far off, in a dark window. It was the color of a hearth fire, a light that had been missing for a long, long time, finally relit. Thank you for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and let us know. Do not forget to subscribe to From Wild West and share your thoughts on Eli and Rosalie's journey.